Now, South Africa's economy is struggling. Continuous power cuts and allegations of corruption are eroding business confidence and deterring investors. But according to the former CEO of the Institute of Internal Auditors South Africa and Eskom board member, Dr Claudelle von Eck, not all hope is lost. In a recent panel hosted by Gibbs and the South African Chamber of UK Partners, she said that nothing is insurmountable and that we can still change things. She joins me now via Zoom. Dr. von Eck, thank you so much for making time for us. We'll talk about the business confidence and what you think needs to be done for us to change that picture. But I want to first get your reaction. You are the current board member at Eskom. So some reaction on this week's developments as a board member. Are you at all concerned about what's happened this week and what it means for the power utility?
Hi, Kramer. Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. Good afternoon to your viewers. When it comes to Eskom, we've got a protocol. The chairman of the board is the one you should be directing the questions at. Here in my capacity as chair of the advisory board of the business ethics unit at Gibbs.
Let's get into the conversation that was had at Gibbs. And maybe the first question I have is whether or not you think South Africa is uninvestable right now. How do you assess, the levels of business and investment confidence?
Look, I think you need to look at confidence internally as well as externally of the country. But if one looks internally within the country, I do think that South Africans sometimes have a tendency, and I suppose it's human nature, to completely look at the negative and not look at the positive aspects. So when I look at South Africa, I think we still have all the ingredients in this country to really build a strong country and the country that it's supposed to be, and a great country for everybody who lives in it. So when it comes to business, I think that business leaders in particular need to have deeper conversations around the importance of corporate citizenry. So instead of just seeing the business in isolation as a money-making machine, seeing the business on the corporate landscape in the context of the business is a corporate citizen. The business gets its license from society to operate, and all the businesses collectively form pillars within society. Now, with that mindset comes the responsibility to think beyond just internally within the organization and how we're going to make money, but also about how do we contribute effectively to a stronger economy in South Africa. Mm-hmm. But the same conversation you would have in the public sector as well. So you've got all these pillars in South Africa, and I really think that we have all the ingredients to build a stronger country.
Yeah. When I look at the discussions that were held between the SA Chamber UK partners with Gibbs, the discussion was around how business can implement a practical turnaround strategy to work together with stakeholders to resurrect, the country's ailing economy. Would it be fair for me to say it doesn't matter what strategy you have to revive the economy, for as long as we have unreliable energy supply, no economy growth plan is going to work?
Yes, I think you need to look at the whole ecosystem. Right, so absolutely yes, but that's one of the elements. So when businesses look into, and it's a part of the conversation that we had last week, for example, is what can businesses do? What can business leaders do in collaborating to help us to combat those things that have ripple effects in what we're then seeing in terms of the infrastructure within the country that ultimately we all need to make sure that we run the economy effectively. So the focus that business should have essentially is not just externally in terms of the problems, but also internally in terms of how are we contributing to the problems, and vice versa, right? So how are we impacting on the surroundings? So what we're really wanting to see with the series that has been launched and in partnership between Gibbs and the Chamber, SA Chamber UK, is to bring the business leaders together around the table. So we would have some bigger events, some workshops to get into deeper conversations around those elements that would really make a difference. And some of those elements would, for example, be how can we collaborate around strengthening the support that we should be having, supplying for whistleblowers, because that, as you know, is a big issue in our country. Often we find that the whistleblowers are isolated. But can we, for example, look at a fund that we all contribute to, so that when they're going through the psychological trauma that inevitably comes with blowing the whistle, that there is support, the legal side of things, that there is support. Talking about practical tools around how do we deal with supply chain management. How can businesses be more circumspect in terms of who they get into bed with. So deeper application of mind around those practical issues where business leaders can make a difference.
Mm-hmm. What do you think needs to be done practically? What does government need to prioritize?
Right, so I think just in terms of from a government perspective, that is really not where our conversation was, and in terms of the focus of the series is really on the business leaders. But business can also influence, in terms of the partnering with government. So those areas where we can see that there may be lack of skill, for example, that we can jump in and assist. I think with the government in terms of prioritizing, you can clearly see that coming through in the budget speech as well. We're clear in terms of what needs to be prioritized, but where the series is going really is to focus the business leaders in terms of where they should be focusing.
Yeah, and is there appetite from the private sector? We've often heard, I think I remember hearing the Sibanye Stillwater CEO about a week or two ago saying that there's almost like an investor strike, so to speak, in South Africa, and until things are gotten right by the government, investors are not so interested in bringing their money here. Do you think, what are you picking up even from the conversations you're having with other stakeholders? Is there appetite to invest even with the challenges the country is facing?
I think you do have some. I think we've got a mixed bag. There are investors who do see the potential in South Africa. I think even here in South Africa as well, because remember we often just tend to talk about investment, foreign investment coming into the country, but there is money here in South Africa as well that can be invested. The clarity of thought, I think, that we need to bring about, and this is really where the conversations and the collaboration would really assist us in where the money could be invested more wisely, so that there is some confidence. But if one looks at what would inform confidence in a country, it really comes down to leadership, but leadership is layers. And what we've got to be mindful of is that we don't get trapped into thinking about leadership only as government leadership, right? Or political leadership. That we look at leadership in a broader context. But to come back to your question in terms of does one see that there's confidence? Yes, I see. I think that you probably have a mixed bag, but there are investors definitely where one can hear that there is still confidence in the future of South Africa. All
right. Dr. Claudelle von Eck, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. I really appreciate your time.